Hello, scholars. Welcome to Latin class. So, for the first couple of weeks, what we are doing in both 3L and 4L is reviewing some sort of basic information about parts of speech, um, just to get us all on the same page and jog our memories, remind us where we were, as well as just helping remember some basic terms that we're going to be using for the rest of the year. For some of you, this might be really really old review, and for others, this might be the first time you've ever heard it. So either way, welcome to class, and let's go through our first set of grammar notes. So today we're going to talk about nouns, and the not just the nouns themselves with endings that we'll go over, but also just the general terms that we use when talking about nouns. So let's go ahead and get started. To start with, every noun in Latin belongs to a group, and those groups are called declensions. All right? A noun declension is sort of like a noun family because every noun in that family has pretty much the same endings. Okay? Believe it or not, there are actually a total of 5 declensions in the Latin language. Okay? Now, the endings for a noun are also known as the cases. The case that a noun is. And what a case does is it actually just tells you in a really simple, quick, and easy way what that noun is doing in the sentence. What is its job? Okay, so we'll talk real quick about what those cases mean. If you have a noun that's in the nominative case, that just means it's the subject. Right? It's doing the action of the sentence. And in English, usually that sounds something like the noun dot dot dot. The noun does something. Okay? Next we have the genitive case. Most times in Latin this is used for possession. Okay? And another S in there. And in Latin, well, actually in English, when we go from Latin to English, we'll take that word that's in the genitive and usually add of the noun. So instead of the noun, like nominative, we have of the noun if it's genitive. Okay. Next, we have the dative case, which in English we call the indirect object. Okay. And this one can be a little tricky to explain, but it's easier just to think of how it sounds in English, which is almost always going to be to or for the noun. Indirect object just means it indirectly receives the action of the verb. So in a sentence like, I give a present to my brother, well, my brother is actually in the dative case. He's the indirect object. I give a present to my brother. Okay? So, to or for the noun if it's dative. If it's accusative, that means it's almost always going to be the direct object, which means it directly receives the object, or excuse me, directly receives the action of the verb. So in that last sentence, I give a present to my brother. The present is what I'm giving, so that would be in the accusative. So the thing you probably noticed in that sentence is that in English, the nominative and accusative sound pretty much the exact same. So either the or a noun. The next one is a little bit tricky. Returning scholars probably have nightmares about this case, but the ablative case can be used for a ton of different things. It's kind of why it's down here near the bottom. It can be used for a bunch of things, but usually it's the object of certain prepositions. So object of prep. Okay? Most of the time, that's a safe bet. Now, as for how you translate it, it depends what preposition you have. But most of the time, you'll translate it into English as something like by, with, or from. Okay? Lastly, we have the vocative case, which again, returning scholars might recognize that the vocative is one we usually just leave off this list in the first place because honestly, most of the time it looks just like the nominative with like one little exception. And it's used for literally one thing, which is direct address. Okay, like when you're talking directly to someone, that person's name would be in the vocative case. And actually, most of the time, it is just names that we use this for. Okay, so the best way to kind of jokingly write it in here is just noun. Hey, noun, I'm talking to you. Vocative, direct address. Okay, let's go ahead and in our little crash course here, talk a little bit about what these endings, these cases actually look like on words. Now, remember, like we said, there are 5 different declensions in Latin, so that means there's actually a little more than 5 different sets of endings that can go on certain words. But luckily, when it comes to nouns, the noun's declension, the group that it's in, will never change, right? So, luckily, this word porta, which means gate, it only takes first declension endings. Okay? Now, adjectives, words that describe nouns, those can change their ending because they have to match the noun they go with. We'll talk about that in just a second, too. But let's go ahead and take a look at what the endings are. So, for singular, which just means if you have one of something, the endings for the first declension look like a, I, it's an M, ah. And there's actually a long mark over that A, which helps us tell this one and this one apart. And vocative is just again. Okay? And since we have an adjective here, we'll go ahead and do the same thing. Adjectives and nouns do what's called agree, which just means their endings match in number, gender, and case. We'll talk about that in just a second, I promise. But for our purposes here, that means the endings are the same. All right? I, ah. And then again. All right? The way you'll translate this, then, is if you look at it, porta means gate, magna means large. So we're going to go back up to what we were looking at here with how you translate each of the cases. So porta magna in the nominative would just be the large gate. Okay. Genitive will be of the large gate. Okay. Dative as the indirect object will be to or for the large gate. And I'm just going to go ahead and say LG from here on so we can save a little time. Accusative, again, just the or a large gate. Ablative, again, this one can be almost anything, but we'll go ahead and assume it's by, with, or from. So by, with, or from the large gate. We'll go ahead and do the vocative. This one's a little silly because, like I said, the vocative is almost always used for names of human beings or, pets, animals. But let's go ahead and pretend, maybe Porta Magna is a person we know. Their name is Large Gate. Seems beautiful, right? So you might say, Large Gate! Hey, Large Gate! Yeah, that's silly, but you get the idea. All right, let's go ahead and look at the next set. So we just did singular. Let's move on to plural. Luckily, plural is going to be, the endings will be a little different, but the way we translate it, it's not going to change really at all. You just make everything from this part plural. So for English, that just means put an S at the end. Okay, but let's go ahead and look at what these endings are just to complete the chart here. So again, we're in plural now, still first declension, still the same words, but we're making it plural. So those plural endings are I, arum, is, that's a long I, as, is, and then I, again for vocative. One more time, that's I, arum, is, as, is. And then I. Okay. And again, we'll go ahead and skip the translation here in the interest of time. But again, it'll just be exactly what was in the other chart with an S at the end. So, the large gates, of the large gates, to or for the large gates. You know, the large gates. By, with, or from the large gates. And, hey, large gates. All right. Moving right along. Next, we have a little more information that we kind of talked about earlier, that the ending of a noun gives you three pieces of information, right? So these couple of little letters give you a ton of information in Latin that we really don't get in English. We just have to guess. But in Latin, the ending tells you the noun's number, its gender, and its case. Okay? Like we talked about, number just refers to whether a noun is singular or plural. Right? Whether there's one of them or more than one of them. Gender is kind of weird for English speakers because we're talking about grammatical gender, which, you know, doesn't always match up with like actual physical gender. So it's almost always grammatical gender, and we'll talk about that in a second as well. But there are three quote unquote genders in the Latin language that nouns belong to. And case is what we just talked about. Case refers to the function of the noun in the sentence. Okay. Now, again, we saw this on the first page, but what's called adjective-noun agreement just means that nouns and adjectives agree or match in those same three ways: number, gender, and case. Okay. Now, again, our veteran scholars most likely remember that usually what this means is that adjectives and nouns have the same ending, like we saw up here. But when you get a little bit more advanced, you realize there are some times when you'll have an adjective that is a different declension all on its own from the noun. So they don't always have to look exactly the same, but no matter what, they will always 100% of the time match in number, gender, and case. Not necessarily declension, but they will in number, gender, and case. Okay? And if you were curious, those three genders in Latin, at least grammatical genders, are what's called masculine, feminine, and neuter. One thing you'll notice is masculine, feminine, and neuter. Again, that doesn't mean boy, girl, nothing, right? It's grammatically masculine, grammatically feminine, and grammatically neuter. Okay? It really just has to do, like I said, with what the endings themselves are. That said, there are times when the grammatical gender does match up with physical gender. So, for example, the natural gender, an example would be puella. The word puella, first declension, feminine noun, means girl. So that would make sense. But then you have pecunia, right? Pecunia means money. There's nothing really feminine inherently about money. It just so happens that it ends in A, and when words end in A in Latin, they're often considered to be grammatically feminine. Okay? And for that matter, most first declension nouns, they're almost all feminine. There are a very few exceptions to this. The number changes depending how you count, but usually there's only about 5 or 6 words in Latin that are first declension but not feminine. And they tend to be occupations and stuff. So most of the time, the vast majority of words that are first declension are feminine. Second declension that we'll talk about next time, these words are going to be either masculine or neuter. Okay. Third and fourth declension can be anything. Okay. So third declension, most of them are either masculine or feminine, and then there's another set that are neuter. Fourth declension, it's really, really hard to tell by looking at the word at all. You just have to memorize, like I say down here. We'll go ahead and skip there. The gender and declension of a noun must be memorized along with the definition when you learn new vocab words, because most of us, including myself, when we first learned Latin, we kind of skip this part. And a lot of times you have to go back and sort of backfill in your brain. And that's not fun. So it's much easier just to memorize all that stuff at once. And I encourage all of you to do that once we start getting our new vocab this year as well. Okay. Last but not least, fifth declension nouns. These are obviously the newest ones. Some of us have learned, some of us aren't there yet. We'll all be using fifth declension this year. Don't worry. But all fifth declension nouns are feminine, with literally one exception, and it's the word dies, which means day. Every other word in the fifth declension is feminine. Okay, so we'll go ahead and wrap up that video for today. I realize I did talk pretty fast, but we are at about 17 minutes right now. So thank you for listening, and I will talk to you all soon. Goodbye.